Welcome back to part 13, making the plywood tool chest. Well, if you're still with me after 12, thank you. And we're now down to the fitting out the interior of the tool chest. So in part 12, we put the runners in. And now we're going to start working on the trays. And I've kept the pieces that were left from ripping the sections for the carcass, which will be okay for the tool, for the tray sides, and any offcuts as well, because this is where you can just sort of start putting extra dividers in, thinking of ways to organise your tools. We'll all have different tool kits. Some of you, and probably not even woodworkers, it could be that you're going to put metalwork tools in here. Some people are going to maybe use it as a crafting box. So I've got one more sheet, which, because what I need are the bottoms of the trays are 250 millimeters front to back, and the strips that we're left with aren't that wide. So you have to dip in. I only need one strip off there because one strip cut in half will do 2 trays. So then there's some timber left for other things. So I'm going to rip those, or rip one strip off there at 225, and then I'll join you on the other side of this. Quick correction. I did mention that the tray depth front to back was 250. I mentioned it once just then. It's actually 225. If you want to make it 250, you can, but it just means when you've got both of them open, they overlap each other quite a lot, and it just makes things a little bit tight for getting into the bottom. But I make them at 225. So I could have cut it on the table saw, but I quite like the cut that I get off my bandsaw. Just with a couple of, I can just about get them in that configuration, the 2 stands, without hitting the legs on the bench. So that's cut now. So now I'll just measure them up and cross cut them. I've cut them to about 226 just to allow for whipping a plane along the edge, just to clean up the edge. So I've ripped that piece down now to 226, barely needs a clean up. Actually, I won't even touch it with the plane, it's fine off the bandsaw. Run along with the sanding block, that's fine. And then you may remember from, I think it was part 2, anyway, it was early on when we did the timber requirements and we ripped the main boards down. We ended up with pieces that were about 145 wide, depending on the thickness of your cut. That's where they come in useful now. So the 18mm ones we're going to use for the sides of our lower tray. So I need to rip those to 110, and then by the time there's a 12mm base on them, that gives us 122, and we've allowed 125 with our runners. And then, because this is 145 and this is the 12mm part that we ripped, we only need that to be 70, so I can actually get 2 out of there. Now I don't actually need 2 in one way, because once I've cut it, I'm going to cut it in the middle. That gives me a front and back of my upper tray. But I also need the ends, and I need dividers. And if you've got some spare that's exactly the right size, you can have a play around with it and see where you want dividers. Just push fit them in and work out where your tools are going to go. So rip this one to 70 and you'll get 2 out of it. Rip this one to 110. Yeah, I've got 2 there, so I'll probably rip them both while I've got the saw set, because I'll be making more of these tool chests anyway. And then I've still got spare parts that I can use for dividers and other bits and pieces. So now I just want to talk about an overview of how you could lay this out. The way I look at this is almost you need to work it backwards. So what tools have you got? What tools are the tools that you use most often and you would want in the top tray? Do you want to put your saws in the lid? Saws are ideal for the lid, in my opinion, because you're using them regularly. They're a flat profile and they slide in nicely. And then it just protects the handles from getting damaged if they're in lower trays or in the bottom of your tool chest. But you can lay it out however you want, and this is the fun bit about it, really. If I go back to this one, which is years old and was actually evolved, it was made out of basically scraps when I was working in somebody else's workshop. And every now and again you'd see a piece and think, oh, I can use that, and then add a tray. But even things like an old piece of MDF and the offcut of the piano hinge, you can make a little lidded section. So if you want to keep spare blades and things underneath, you can double up in height and create more space. Now, the more dividers you put in, the less space you've got, because you're eating into your space. You're making your trays stronger, and you're also making the space less flexible, because once you've set it up, for example, if I put one across here that's the perfect size for these chisels, if I ever decide I don't want the chisels there, or I want a different set of chisels that are an inch longer, all of a sudden it's not a flexible space. So there's a temptation to make it absolutely customized to what your toolkit is, but that's not always the best way. And then when I look at the more recent one that I did, eventually this has got two toolkits out, and one of the toolkits is going to go into the new tool chest. So at the minute this has got chisels down here, but this will have these chisels in a tool roll down here, and I'll relay it out and a few more planes will go in. But even this on the top one, little space for planes, marking out, chisels, and then because I use a lot of card scrapers, I thought, well, I'll just try something different. So putting some of the dividers in with a little piece taken out, so you can get all your round ones, shaped ones, square ones. So you can just play around with this and get it to suit you best. And we'll have a look at my traditional one now, because it's just food for thought. Now obviously the traditional tool chest is taller, so there's 3 trays in there. But you can see on the top one, I only put one divider in to give me lots of flexibility. In the left is all my small planes, and they sit inside a tray which is removable. I can lift that out and take it to the bench if I want. The next one down, I then offset. So this is split in half. This one I thought, well, what if I end up with something really long that I want to put in? So I put a divider 2/3 of the way across. Then in the base, in the larger one, the equivalent of our larger one back in the middle again, so that I can put tool rolls in there. And the other thing to point out is these have got a groove run into the front and back, so that you can then sit that in there. Now on the plywood ones, I tend to just butt them up against it, but that's another design feature that you can do. So you can set it out however you see fit, and obviously this one's slightly different because there isn't a cavity in the lid, so all my saws go in a holder there. But my point of view would be, live with it for a while, do the bare minimum, just get the outside of the tray done, cut some dividers that fit in front to back, and just keep moving them around. The next point to mention is when we make these trays, and I'm sure you're already aware of it, but some people might not be, is that obviously both trays are going to be a different length. The top tray goes completely from side to side or end to end in the carcass, whereas the bottom tray has now got 12mm runners at each end, so it needs to be equivalent of around 24mm shorter. So when you're cutting your pieces and setting your tools, setting your saws up, for example, with fences, don't just get carried away and cut them all. And the other thing I would say is, don't make it too tight. It doesn't need to run like rubbing up against the sides of the tool chest. Even though it's ply, you know, it's going to end up with stresses and strains, and if it's rubbing all the time, it just makes it just doesn't work very well. You can actually make it even a couple of mil. You know, you can see down that one there's probably a mil. That one runs just beautifully with one hand. There's a bit of wax on the runners. The bottom one, I think when I cut it, ended up with a bigger gap, look, probably a couple of mil. But the runners are so big at 18mm, it still runs beautifully. If you try and run it from one side, of course, you'll probably get it to rack, but it's got 2 handles. So don't go for an exact fit. They want to be slightly under. And sometimes you'll even leave, when you make them, the base sticking out a little bit further. Set the ends in 1/2mm so that the base tray keeps it running nicely, but you've just moved the ends away from the side of the tool chest. But really the main thing is measure the internal measurement and then just cut it a little bit, you know, 1 or 2mm shorter. Okay, so now I'm going to cross cut the bases, which I've ripped at 225 wide or 226. Many ways to get the measurement that you want. Probably the easiest way is cut them slightly over and then just keep adjusting them until they fit, and you can put the tray just on and try it. The top's pretty easy. You can run the tape measure across it, and then mathematics says we did it 9/10. We've got 2 18mm ends, allowing for the fact we might have inset them slightly. So if you take that off, you're left with, what, you're taking off 36. So you're left with 874. So cutting them around 874, but you can either do that and run the tape across them, or, and particularly for the one when you're trying to measure in lower down, which is a bit more tricky, is use a set of pinch rods, just extend them in there, and then you can use that to transfer your measurement. Okay, so I'm going to cut the top one at 874. So I'm just checking the end of my board is square, and then I'm going to mark at 874, run my line across it, and then I'll cut just away from it slightly on the table saw. But again, you can use a hand saw. I showed you in the earlier one, I love my sort of large Veritas cross cut. Cuts a really nice straight line and a clean line on ply. Apologies for the background noise, but I'm on a farm site here and there's some machinery going on outside typically. So I'm going to get this one cut, get the first one done. That's the top tray cut. I haven't cleaned the ends up yet, which I will do. I'll just give them a sand, but already that one will be fine. And then for the bottom one, obviously it's going to be shorter. So I did cut this at 874. So if we knock off another 24 for the two 12mm runners, we should be at 850. And then I've measured it in two different ways. I've put the pinch rods right across the middle from that center screw to that one, so I can see what that measurement is. But then I've also used the pain in the neck method of using this tape, reading what's on here, and then adding on there 67, and actually that measurement gives me 852. So if I allow my 1 to 2 mil for clearance, that's down to 850. So both methods bring me down to 850. So I'll cut it at 851 and then do a bit of adjusting and get that bottom one sliding well before we move on to the next steps. That's the two of them cut now. So apart from a little sand on the ends, and once I clean the runners up and wax them, they'll slide nice anyway. But even now, just if I reach down, it's fine. I go to the bottom one, fine as well. So we're ready to mark them up just so that we don't get them confused. Sometimes you'll find they fit round better one way than the other. So you can mark left, right, back, front and so on. I've ripped the other timber down, so that's down to 110 now. So I've got plenty there for the sides and the ends of the lower tray. And then the top one, I've ripped the one piece down to 2 lots of 70. That'll do a front and a back, and then I've got all that for ends and dividers. So I think I'm running out for my 15 minutes for this part 13. So I think actually putting the trays together will fit into part 14, and we'll call it that for part 13. So in recap, I would just say this is the part of the project that people tend to rush, because it is the bit where you can be a bit more creative and you can get your tools set out. I can lay my tools out on here now, just on that board, and I can work out measurements, measure the tools, see how it works. But if you just rush into it, I guarantee you'll look at it after it's a bit like when you set your workshop up, you put everything in a certain place, and after a month you think, oh, I'm gonna move that bench, I'll move this. You want it to be reversible. So live with it for a little while, get a sketch pad, think about what tools you actually need in there and what you're gonna put in there. Are you thinking of upgrading any tools? Because if they're gonna be a different size, then you maybe need to check what they are and allow for them, so that when you do upgrade, you can fit everything in. So put a bit of thought into it, and just focus on prepping your timber lengths for now. And then in part 14, we'll start assembling the trays. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe, share it with your friends. Do what you can to support the channel, be much appreciated. And thanks for sticking with it. I'll see you in part 14.